Tom, we've talked all around it. Today was the big day. We've heard the various cabinet postings. So if, I guess, start by telling me any major surprises or disappointments for you as far as you're concerned.
Well, I think that one of the pleasant surprises, because poor Chris Skeet has spent 4 years getting roundly beaten up because he was trying to deliver messages from the CAQ into the English-speaking community, and it didn't always go over very well. I was very happy for him to see that he made it to cabinet. I'm also happy for the English-speaking community by some of the signals that I see. Getting rid of Simon Jolin Barrette in charge of Bill 101 and Bill 96, that's a positive signal. Saying that Éric Girard, the finance minister, is going to have special responsibility for the English-speaking community, that's a positive development. Putting in, the new minister in charge, Christine Fréchette, putting her in charge of this issue. She quit the Parti Québécois cabinet because of the Charter of Values, which was the precursor to Bill 21. Yeah. So, and by the way, he was just about the last person to make it through the swearing-in ceremony, which was a symbolic thing in and of itself, the infamous statements by Jean Boulet. So I think that it's a real obvious attempt by Legault to say the second mandate is not going to be necessarily done on the backs of minorities, and that's probably a very good signal to be receiving.
What do you think about Éric Girard as the choice? I had heard something about it having to do with the fact that he, has very strong ties to business in English, and so that will help him build bridges. Do you think he's a good pick for that role?
I think he's a fantastic pick for that role. And here's the other thing, because the next part that I'm going to speak to you about is how Pierre Fitzgibbon is taking over everything, including Hydro-Quebec. But what I see here is a clear signal that the Pierre Fitzgibbon, who can be really problematic in terms of his, way to bulldoze stuff through and always my way or the highway, he's also clearly managed to get a signal through to the Premier's office. Look, we can't continue this culture war against the English-speaking community and against the minorities in Quebec. It will be hurting us economically. So I see Éric Girard as being an exemplar of that, and an attempt by Legault to say, yes, we're going to change our tone. And frankly, Roberge is probably one of the worst ministers of education we've ever had. Yeah. And his new title requires him to have a two-sided business card. He's got so many titles, but none of them are important. But he is the minister in charge of Bill 101 / Charter of the French Language / Bill 96. And at least it's been pulled away from the hands of Simon Jolin Barrette, who was an ideologue and never listened to anybody and had zero experience. So, it can't get worse than Simon Jolin Barrette, and we'll just wait to see whether Roberge turns out to be slightly less bad as the minister in charge of all this stuff than he was as Minister of Education.
Yeah, well, with respect to the, not really, when you talked about Simon Jolin Barrette not really listening to anyone, I think you might throw Jean-François Roberge into that same pot, Tom, just to be honest. I mean, we talked to everybody in education, EMSB, never had anything to say, never communicated with any of those people. I don't know why we think this would be any different.
Well, now he's got somebody above him, right? The finance ministers who's talking to the English-speaking community, a minister of immigration who speaks 4 languages and is tuned in to the issues involving immigrants and is there to build bridges. So if he decides that he's going to go off on some sort of crusade a la Simon Jolin Barrette, he'll get his wings clipped quickly, in my view.
Okay. I was surprised that he made the cut. I didn't think he was going to make the cut. What do you think?
I was thunderstruck that he made the cut
really?
Because I just found him so breathtakingly incompetent.
Yeah.
And it's incompetence exists. Arrogance exists. But the two of them together, incompetence and arrogance, that's a really crummy combination because you can't do anything with somebody who's got both of those.
I couldn't agree more.
Were you surprised,
Bernard?
by Jean Boulet getting Labour and not having that taken away from him, Tom?
He should have been thrown out on his rear end after the comments he made against immigrants.
Agreed.
I guess Legault is still beholden to him because his family is extraordinarily important in what we call the Mauricie region. In other words, read the grand region around Trois-Rivières. And they've kept him on. By the way, he didn't do a terrible job as Labour minister in the past, and he'll probably be able to trundle along if they put enough padding on the wall so that he doesn't bump into anything. But I just find it unbelievable and frankly unforgivable that somebody who has said stuff like that continues to represent, because that's what cabinet is. It's the government. When you say the government, it is the cabinet. That's the government.
Yeah, he shouldn't be in it.
To make it into the holy of holies after what he did, I just find it really shameful.
Agreed. I'd love your thoughts on Bernard Dranville as the education minister.
It's unbelievable. He's got no experience or expertise to command him for that job. But they were keeping him away from what he dearly wanted. He had told everybody who wanted to hear that he wanted something big like natural resources. Well, that would have been even worse. So why not give him something that really doesn't matter, like education? It's going to be a terrible time. You know, I got, like everybody, I've got friends and family who are in the teaching profession, and like nobody can believe what just happened because they thought it couldn't get worse than Robert's, and it looks like it just did.
You know, we were talking to Jim Menny earlier on, had a rather interesting take on this, suggesting that Bernard Dranville got education because obviously Francois Legault knows he'd like his job
buddy.
down the road.
Good luck.
Giving him a really difficult portfolio that, as you said, he has no experience in. It's kind of like throwing him into the Shark Tank, right, in a sense?
Yeah. And, he'll show up. He'll give speeches. He's an incredibly breathtakingly boring speaker, but he has a very high opinion of his opinion. And he'll be out there, visiting schools and talking about stuff and answering in question period. But, yeah, it is a very tough job. That's why Legault doesn't want to have anybody who's actually doing it.
You know what I said on the upside with Dranville in that role? He'll give us interviews because he loves the microphone.
He loves to hear the sound of his own voice. Yeah.
Oh, it's amazing. And that's one of the reasons, by the way, he didn't go get a big ministry. There was this infamous press conference in Lévis as he was launching, and Legault is right behind him. And it's worth going back to the tape of that conference. And he just starts swinging for the fences. He starts losing it in the lights and saying, oh, get off my back with greenhouse gases. We're going to build this tunnel and blah, blah, blah. Well, Legault had been doing his best at the beginning of the campaign to make people forget about the fact that he had never done anything on the environment. So this guy was just doing the exact opposite of what Legault's team wanted. And you should watch Legault's face. He was just like frozen, as if, ready to throttle the guy. But you watch Dranville, he really thought he was good. He's just like, watch me go. I'll give more than the client wants. And sure enough, he wound up with education, as if that was supposed to be like a booby prize. But actually, education is too important for our kids, and it should have been somebody really serious. But unfortunately, it's not.
Didn't we see today, didn't Legault make a reference, Natasha, to education being his top priority item?
And putting the pressure on. I love that out of the gate. It's like,
just so you know, Bernard, it's my top priority item. Good luck.
Don't blow it. I would love your thoughts, too, on the fact that we almost have gender parity here, 16 men, 14 women, and we have our first Indigenous minister in Quebec.
Well, let's start with Catherine Champagne-Jourdain. And if the name Jourdain from that particular Innu community sounds familiar, she's the cousin of Jonathan Genet-Jourdain, who was a one-term NDP MP from the same area, same community, and they're cousins. And I just find her, I watch her press conference after, because I sometimes, because I know the traps, I watch the journalists, just throw a couple of little firecrackers at her to see if they could get her to skip, and she just stayed right on message. So are you sorry you're not the minister responsible for Indigenous affairs? Well, we've got a great minister in charge of that, and I'm so proud to be the employment minister. Next question. And if the chief of a large community calls you, are you going to accept his call? Of course I'll accept his call, and I'll try to find out what the issue is, and I'll make sure that our government and the great minister that we have who is in charge of that, Mr. Lafreniere, we're sensitive to their concerns. So it was just like, it was a master class in political communication. I'm saying, okay, she's amazing. If she's coming in on her first day in front of the microphones as she gets sworn in, and she's that good, keep an eye on Catherine Champagne-Jourdain. I think she's going to be one of the stars of this second mandate.
That's exciting. I find that very exciting.
Yeah, that is good. Let's talk about one other thing that was going on today, because, of course, we don't want to forget this entirely. The Emergencies Act inquiry in Ottawa. This time, I don't know, Tom, if it's even fair to say we should have expected this, to find out about division within the Ottawa police force itself.
Well, I mean, how can you get to the point where the city has to fire their chief of police right in the middle of the biggest policing problem they've ever had, unless there's been internal dissent? I mean, poor Mr. Slowly, he's going to get his chance. He'll have his lawyer and he'll come in and give his side of the story. But it doesn't look very good for Mayor Jim Watson and for Chief Slowly. I mean, it's just such a litany of failure. And, of course, Jim Watson had his prescription we talked about the other day. It must be Doug Ford's fault. Yeah, sure. Weren't you the mayor of that town? And so we're learning more and more. I think nothing that I've heard so far, and there's still going to be weeks of this stuff left to go. Nothing I've heard so far changes my mind that what we're going to get is a conclusion that, yes, at that point where they had gotten to, they needed the Emergencies Act. But the problem is that they got to that point because they failed on everything else that they could have done in the interim. I think that that's the way the commissioner's report's going to shape up.
Right, and the best thing that comes out of that is that they do better next time. Like they,
Yeah, so they'll be referred to as, the judge's name is Rouleau. They'll call them the Rouleau directives or something because it's, the statute's been sitting there on the books for 42 years, but it's never been used. So they'll get a chance to go through it and say, well, okay, the statute said this, but don't forget, Mr. Justice Rouleau said, well, before you get there, you've got to make sure you do this. And once you do declare, you can't go after people's rights. They seized bank accounts at the time, and that was overreach, according to the judge. There'll be that sort of thing in there.
Tom Mulcair. Tom, thank you. We'll talk to you again tomorrow.